Jason Carasone, District Attorney, Warren County, New York. Sheriff James LaFar, Sheriff, Warren County, New York. Judge John Hall, Supreme Court Judge, Warren County, New York, at the Municipal Center. We're going to talk about the Westbrook Swamp. And we're going to talk about another little swamp called the Lake George Association. And Ray Brook of Department of Environmental Conservation and David Wick and Roger Smith over at the Lake George Park Commission. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a scenario where David Wick and Roger Smith and the lawyers for the Fund for Lake George, which is a rather interesting green money tax sheltering scheme for investments. Apparently there's a lawyer by the name of Tom West from Dunham's Bay, which is next to Harris Bay, where I grew up. I'm from Glens Falls. Jason Carasone, and Jim LaFar knows very well who I am. Now we're going to talk about that Westbrook Swamp, and we're going to talk about Dam A up at Ticonderoga. We're going to have us a little discussion about the mill pond. The up and down and up and down and up and down waters of the mill pond and the pinhole in the bathtub. Now, I didn't call it the pinhole in the bathtub. The Lake George Park Commission calls it the pinhole in the bathtub. Now, we want to talk about the engineering of the Westbrook Swamp and all that funny money that's floating around in the Westbrook Swamp. You see, Mr. Carasone, the up and down, up and down, up and down waters on the mill pond associated with Dam A, which is owned by the state of New York, has been the cause of immense property damage on Lake George for many decades. That dam, the pinhole in the bathtub, Jason Carasone, you can ask David Wick about that, and you can ask the Lake George Association about the pinhole in the bathtub. That damned dam has been cited by the state of New York's attorneys, by the state of New York's investigators, by the state of New York's engineers, and by the United States government's engineers as being the pinhole in the bathtub. The release mechanisms, the spillways at Dam A, are 46% of the capacity that they should be. That's according to the federal government and the state government's engineers. And that's why the Lake George Park Association, the Lake George Park Commission, refers to the Dam A, dam number 230, as the pinhole in the bathtub. Now, Jason Carasone, Sheriff James LaFar, Judge John Hall. According to many state prosecutors, and according to many state witnesses, and a lot of property owners on Lake George, the mill pond, huge amounts of damages to boathouses, islands, shoreline, bulkheads, and docks has been caused directly by the up and down, up and down, up and down waters of Lake George, New York, the mill pond. Now, question, why in the flippin' hell do we need a sewage treating swamp a sewage treating swamp on West Brook. What's the point of building millions of dollars worth of sewage-eating swamp by David Decker and the Lake George, Lake Champlain Coalition? Why would it be necessary at all to build a swamp along the West Brook at a cost of millions of dollars? Now, case in point, Dam A, Dam 230, the pinhole in the bathtub, has been used to flush Lake George. They've been flushing the sewage-contaminated lake, the mill pond, for years, for decades. They've been quietly and secretly environmentally flushing Lake George for decades. Because Lake George, according to the Darren Freshwater Institute, RPI University, Paul Smith's College, SUNY Adirondack, the Department of Environmental Conservation, State of New York, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Army Corps of Engineers, Kathy Bozzoni, Chris Nowinski, and Tom West, and the Lake George Association, and the governor of the state of New York, and let's see, the director of the Department of Environmental Confiscation, DEC, have all said that Lake George has a sewage problem. Now, what we've got to work on here, Judge John Hall and Sheriff James LaFar and District Attorney Jason Carasone, is exactly why Dam 230 has been used to flush all the sewage out of Lake George. Up and down, up and down, up and down water, diluting the solution of the pollution for the solution. Lake flushing, environmental lake flushing, and that's precisely and exactly what Lake George Park Association, Lake George Park Commission has been doing with the mill pond for decades. Diluting the pollution in Lake George by giant environmental flushes of lowering the lake in the fall and letting the ice form. So in the spring, during runoff, when the ice comes slamming back up, it destroys boathouses, it destroys islands, it destroys shoreline, it destroys bulkheads, and it wiped out the Witham family docks and large numbers of other docks all over Lake George for decades. Judge John Hall, District Attorney Jason Carasone, Sheriff James LaFar. This dock destroying mechanism, this boathouse destroying mechanism, Dam A, made all those dock and boathouse repair contractors. You heard what I said, Jason Carasone. The dock and boathouse repair contractors. Huge amounts of money have been made by certain families that are in the dock repair business. They love it. They love the up and down water on Lake George, New York. They get to rebuild those boathouses. And they get to repair and replace all those damaged and destroyed docks. And if you take a good, hard, long look into the history of what I'm conveying as a criminal complaint to the Warren County District Attorney's Office, to the Sheriff's Office, maintaining a property-destroying nuisance, an inadequate dam that has been prosecuted by the state's attorneys themselves. In other words, Mr. Jason Carasone, Judge John Hall, Sheriff James LaFar, State lawyers have many times complained and sued and prosecuted over that damn dam and the up and down antics, the shenanigans associated with flushing huge amounts of sewage, flushing just like a toilet. And I've got huge amounts of records to prove that what's being said in this video is 100% accurate, 100% truthful. Judge John Hall and Bartlett, Pontiff, Stewart, and Rhodes, Amy Bartlett, and my old friend Cat Hogan. Former District Attorney Cat Hogan. And Basil Sagos and the Attorney General for the state of New York. The historical proof, the records of the state's own lawyers reveal that this video is 100% accurate, and the historical investigation of this nuisance, this is maintaining a nuisance which is destroying docks and boathouses, islands, and shoreline. Now, Ellen Apperson Brown and the Lake George Association, with the Lake George Mirror, the Post-Star, the Glens Falls Messenger, the Glens Falls Chronicle, the Albany Times-Union, the Troy Record, even June Maxim's North Country Gazette, claim that there's problems with the old mill pond and the flushing of large amounts of sewage that's draining out of all the septic tanks along the shorelines of Lake George. They're flushing it into Lake Champlain. Jason Carasone, Sheriff James LaFar, Judge John Hall, and Mr. Vinny Cressito, the owner and the operator of the Holiday Inn on Lake George, New York, the town council supervisor, the chairman of the Lake George Town Council, Vinny Cressito, and Mayor Bob Blaze. Come on in, Robert Blaze, and let's talk about the flushing of the sewage-laden, sewage-contaminated, sewage-polluted, sewage-poisoned Lake George, New York. The Mill Pond. And how do they flush it? With their dock-destroying mechanism. This is a boathouse destroyer. They're maintaining a public nuisance which causes billions of dollars in property damage. Now, James LaFar, this is a continuing nuisance. Judge John Hall, this is a continuing nuisance. Jason Carasone, when you maintain a public nuisance that destroys millions of dollars in property every year, that's a criminal matter. And this annual festival of stuff the pockets with money by certain building supply companies, permit issuers like the state of New York and the towns and the counties for all that, fees and expenses associated with getting new permits to repair a dock or a boathouse. This is the biggest cash cow in Lake George history. And this is how I know. I used to work for Scotty McLaughlin, Frank Bushy, John Matthews, and Alger Mason, just for starters. Ask the LaFon brothers about the giant cash cow on Lake George during spring festival of dock and boathouse repair. The festival of rip-rapping the islands. John Apperson and several state attorney generals and several Warren County prosecutors prosecuted the nuisance on the mill pond, Jason Carasone, and it's ongoing. What's the big deal with maintaining that public nuisance, Judge John Hall? Now, to David Decker's lawyers, I think the Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute, SUNY Adirondack, and Darren Freshwater Institute, Chris Novinsky, and Kathy Bozzoni come on down with David Wick. And let's explain the smartest lake in the world and why it's full of sewage and why they keep flushing it every damned year. Every damned year they flush that mill pond. Jason Carasone, Sheriff James LaFar, Judge John Hall. It wiped out the Withams. It wiped out my mother and father. It cost them everything they owned. And the people that maintain this public nuisance, the state of New York, wound up owning all their property. Wow, what a racket. What a stinking racket. Dumping all that sewage into Lake Champlain, creating a scenario where the taxpayers of the United States and the taxpayers of Vermont and the taxpayers of New York have to spend billions cleaning it up. Why is it that this toilet flushing mechanism and all the shit that swirls around it, and I said that correctly, Jason Carasone, I said that correctly, Judge John Hall, and I said it correctly, Sheriff James LaFar, and bring old Bud York into this conversation, and let's have Kat Hogan come back and explain her actions. All of this shit swirling around in Lake George being flushed into Lake Champlain at a cost of how many billions to the American taxpayers to clean it all up? Lake George Association, you want to chime in here and have something to say? Tom West, you're an attorney, buddy, from Dunham's Bay, and you know damn well who this is. Right, Tom West? And you can get a hold of John Mason, you can get a hold of Billy Mason, you can get a hold of Bobby Mason, you can get a hold of the whole Mason clan and all the McLaughlins too. And let's talk about the annual spring festival of repair all those boathouses and repair all those docks. Get a hold of Frank Bushy Jr. Come on down, Frank Bushy, and let's talk about all those destroyed docks and boathouses. And bring John Matthews of the Castaway Marina with you. And Dean Howland Jr. Let's bring Dean Howland Jr. along for shit and grins. Shits and grins. And talk about the annual stuffing of the pockets by all the material sellers, the permit and the fees and the licensing and the engineering and all the inspections and all the costs of this annual festival of stuff the pockets with the money from the damn destruction of millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of property on the mill pond, which is a continuing nuisance. And then here's the Judson Witham challenge. Precisely why is it that the Harris Bay Development Corporation, the Harris Bay Yacht Club, why is it that they install floating docks? Why is it that they spent many, many millions of dollars putting in a floating marina? Is that so that the state of New York can continue the flushing of the sewage? The annual flushing of the sewage? How about it, Peter Boyer and Dr. Richard Hayes Phillips of the Lake George Land Conservancy? Let's bring the whole Lake George Land Conservancy and Raybrook DEC into this conversation. What's up with the annual flushing of Lake George? The up and down and up and down, up and down water of the mill pond. Jason Carasone. Who represents the Glens Falls banks, Jason Carasone? Who are the attorneys for the International Paper Company, and who are the attorneys for Enel Power and Green Mountain Power and Systems Properties and let's see, International Power and Paper? Who are the lawyers that were representing the village and town of Ticonderoga when they used the Lachute River as their giant open sewer that requires flushing? They got to flush the river. Now, David Decker, $1,000 a truckload for swamp dirt over there at the Charles Woods, Adirondack Music Festival site adjacent the Gaslight Village on West Brook. $1,000 a truckload. $1,000 a truckload for dirt. And how much did those swamp plants cost you? They bought hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of swamp plants that could have been harvested from the east side wetlands and save a huge amount of money. Mayor Bill Blaze, Town Supervisor Vincent Crosito. Now let's get real here, folks. What in the flying hell is going on with the flushing racket? The environmental flushing racket using Dam A, which is less than half the size that it should be. Why are the spillways so small? Intentionally. Why are they maintained that way? Why are they allowed to continue to operate when they're less than half the size they're supposed to be? Sheriff James LaFar. The United States courts, the U.S. Attorney General, how about the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice? What in the flippin' hell is going on with flushing the mill pond and destroying billions of dollars in private property during the annual festival of Stuff Your Pockets by certain contractors and certain material suppliers and certain permit and fees and inspection costs of certain municipal and county and town and state bureaucrats? What is this annual festival of Stuff Thy Pockets? David Wick, director of Lake George Park Commission. What's going on, David Wick? Hell, they tried to fire you from your job. They went gonzo and psychotic trying to fire David Wick over an accidental spilling of 1 single gallon of gasoline into Lake George. While millions upon millions upon billions of gallons of sewage is flushed through Lake George all the time. Through the pinhole in the bathtub. Jason Carasone, Judge John Hall, James LaFar, Sheriff LaFar, Bud York. Why do they call it the pinhole in the bathtub? Why would the Lake George Park Commission call it the pinhole in dam number 230, Dam A? Why does dam 230, Dam A, have a damn pinhole for a spillway? A pinhole. Ladies and gentlemen, maintaining an inadequate public nuisance that causes untold billions of dollars in damages in a conspiracy to flush Lake George of all the rotten sewage that leaks into it from all those septic tanks that the Glens Falls banks and the Albany banks and all the mortgage companies and the bankster gangsters in New York enable and finance. All those lakefront properties, all those septic tanks are financed through the bankster gangsters of New York. And using that pinhole, Dam A, they've been flushing that lake for many decades. And in fact, And in reality, as a matter of law, Sheriff James LaFar, Mr. Carasone, and Judge John Hall. That's what destroyed Clifford and Anita Witham's business many years in a row. And Raybrook, Department of Environmental Conservation, and Basil Sagos, and the Attorney General and Governor of the state of New York, precisely why is it that the state of New York is allowed to maintain and continue to use the pinhole in the bathtub? That's a direct question to the governor of the state. And you're going to have to answer it, Mr. Cuomo. Basil Sagos, Tom West, David Decker's lawyers, and all the news media in New York know all about this story. So you can't hide it anymore. The pinhole in the mill pond. Ellen Apperson Brown, Chris Nowinski, Tom West, Dr. Richard Hayes Phillips. The pinhole in the mill pond. What the hell is going on with all those sewage flushing cleansings of the smartest lake in the world, Chris Nowinski? And it's time for the Darren Freshwater Institute and RPI University and Lenovo IBM Corporation to start answering these questions. What is going on with the sewage flushing, mill pond draining, mill pond drawing down pinhole in the bathtub? David Wick. Ladies and gentlemen, if they don't have the answers, ask Dan Steck, John Stroh, the town supervisor for the town of Queensbury. I don't know, let's get a hold of the Warren County Board of Supervisors, the Washington County Board of Supervisors, and the Essex County Board of Supervisors, and the town of Ticonderoga. Let's ask them, what's up with the pinhole in the bathtub? And who are the lawyers? Who are the lawyers that are representing the International Paper Corporation? And exactly who dumped all that shit? 1.5 million cubic yards of shit right in front of Fort Ticonderoga. At the end of the Poop Chute River, Jason Carasone, Judge John Hall, Sheriff James LaFar, and Mr. Vincent Crosito, the owner and operator of the Holiday Inn at Lake George, New York, and every motel and hotel operator on Lake George, New York. Why is the mill pond flushed all the time? Why Georgia Witham Bain, Tracy Ann McDonald, Heather Witham Carboni, Brooke Witham, Lisa McLaughlin, Marcia McLaughlin, Susan McLaughlin O'Hanlon. I forget the oldest sister's name there, I'm sorry. Why is it precisely Billy Mason, William Mason of Tecundawide, up on Cleverdale? Why do they maintain Dam A, Billy Mason, John Mason, Bobby Mason, Richard Mason, old Dick Mason? What's the story with the pinhole that flushes all the sewage from the Lake George septic tank? Is it a septic tank? Is that what Lake George has become? A septic tank? Lake George Association? Now let's have a real honest, thorough discussion of why the state of New York and the United States taxpayers are spending so many billions of dollars cleaning up that mess. If it wasn't a problem, why would we have to spend so much money fixing it? Judge John Hall, Jason Carasone, District Attorney, Warren County, why would we have to spend so much money fixing it? Sheriff James LaFar. Now to David Decker and the Lake George Lake Champlain Coalition and David Decker's lawyers, $1,000 a truckload in all those swamp plants. Gee golly whiz. I wonder how much Clifford and Anita Witham's real swamp is actually worth. And that's going to Jason Carasone, Judge John Hall, Sheriff James LaFar, the Attorney General for the state of New York, the Attorney General for the United States, and the Director of the FBI, Christopher Wray. Now, to the Post-Star and ABC News and NBC News and the Lake George Mirror and the Adirondack Almanac and John Warren and Brian Mann of the NPR radio and Paul Smith's College and SUNY Adirondack and, SUNY Cornell. Let's bring SUNY Cornell into this discussion and answer the question, what the hell's up with the Pinhole? The Pinhole 230, the Pinhole Dam A. Roger Smith, Lake George Park Commission, we need to have some answers. Folks, I'm going to leave it right there. We're up at 30 minutes. And as always, hasta la vista, God bless, and you betcha, we're coming back.